Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today's session will begin shortly. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today's session will begin shortly. We have a number of attendees that are getting onto the webinar, so we'll begin in just a minute or so. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. This is the last webinar as a part of a series of 3 webinars, and today we'll be focusing on the key learnings from the ongoing vaccines distribution effort and paving the way for the future. My name is Andrea Gruber. I'm head of special cargo at IATA, and I'll be your host today. As a follow-up of the webinar 1 and 2 that focused on the industry readiness and preparedness of the global distribution of vaccines throughout the supply chain, we have seen that from the manufacturing to distribution, the COVID-19 vaccine has offered up a variety of logistical challenges for the supply chain to tackle along the transportation journey. The industry's preparedness and response have been proven, their efficiencies with communication and collaboration being the pillars of our ongoing efforts. Today's speakers will provide you with some of the insights into how the continuous handling and transport of vaccine is being secured throughout the supply chain's aviation's role in supporting equitable access to vaccines worldwide, and experiences drawn from the past, which will help shape the future. Just a few housekeeping information. All microphones have been muted. Sorry. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards, including the PowerPoint presentation on the IATA website. Today, we have a number of participants that will be joining. We'll try to tackle questions during the session panel at the end of this webinar. So please use the question box that is available and post your question that we'll be answering. Note that this webinar is conducted under the competition law compliance. So when you submit a question and if there are some that will not be in position to answer, it might be the reason why. Here's the agenda for today, and I would like already to thank all of you for taking the time to join this webinar. And as well to the speakers that will provide their experience throughout our 2 hours session. To start with, I would like to give the floor to the first speakers, Mr. Brian Pierce, Chief Economist at IATA, who will provide us with the recent economic developments in the air cargo market and the vaccine rollout. Brian, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good day to everybody. If we could move to the next slide, please, and the one after that. So look, let me start with what we know has happened up to the end of February. You know, the cargo business for airlines has been really strong relative to the passenger business. The passenger business, as you can see, is still well below pre-crisis, pre-COVID levels, particularly international passenger business, whereas the cargo business in terms of ton kilometers flown, the green line, you know, is now, you know, well above pre-crisis levels. February 9% higher, and you know, it looks as if it's getting stronger. But if we look at the next slide, you know, there have been differences between trade lanes. You know, generally cargo has been strong, but there's been quite a bit of variation. The strongest trade lanes have been those essentially connecting North America to Asia. So the North Pacific, I think, has really benefited from the strength of the US economy and the continued strength, the quick recovery of the Chinese economy. And these numbers here are segments flown rather than origin destination markets. So those Middle East routes are essentially the Middle East airlines flying cargo via their Gulf hubs. And so that has been a very strong part of the industry as well. By contrast, some of the European routes, Europe to Asia, the North Atlantic, relatively weaker, really reflecting the weakness of European economies. But moving to the next slide, I think the economic environment for air cargo is actually really positive at the moment. You can see what's happened to the wider economy outside of travel and tourism, for example. The blue line shows global industrial production. We've had very much a V-shaped recovery. So actually late last year, you know, much of the global economy had actually got back to pre-crisis levels, pre-COVID levels. That is a big factor behind the demand for air cargo. Obviously, we're here to talk about vaccines, but more broadly, you know, that has driven a lot of the air cargo business. I guess one of the issues, though, that's come from the wider economic recovery is that that's pulled up energy demand. So airlines are now having to pay quite a bit more for their jet fuel, more than $70 a barrel, as you can see from the red line, which is almost back to where we were before the crisis. Next slide, please. But let me just emphasize, you know, the importance of the general economic recovery for air cargo, because I think, you know, that is looking pretty positive for most regions, although there's a lot of variation. You know, Asia Pacific is obviously a standout for its strength and the fact that in 2020 there wasn't too much of a decline. Obviously, that's dominated by the Chinese economy. The contrast is obviously given by Europe, the black line, which was extremely weak last year and is slow to recover this year because of the continued lockdowns that we're having in Europe because of the deterioration in the virus control situation. But those lines are all sloping upwards. You know, that is positive for cargo. Next slide. Obviously, the big thing has been for the airline industry is the impact of the vaccine transport and the vaccination, the rollout that has taken place. This has been critical for both for opening up economies, but also is important for air cargo in that it's important for allowing a return of passenger aircraft, particularly wide-body passenger aircraft that typically play such an important role in transporting air cargo. Typically, more than half is transported in the belly holds of passenger aircraft. So the vaccination rate and the point at which governments can lower travel restrictions to international travel, is really quite important. As you can see here, these are forecasts from a specialist science consultancy called Airfinity, and they're based on not just the current rollout, but what they know about vaccine orders and vaccine production. What I would say is that these lines, which show the dates when certain proportions of the population are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, have been moving out as we've had some problems with production and with some of the vaccines. But there's some good news in this. The US and UK look set to have vaccinated 75% of their population by July. That should allow markets to be opened, particularly across the North Atlantic, US, UK. Continental Europe, a bit slower. The question is whether governments will open up economies once the high risk and healthcare part of the population is vaccinated, which would be summer, or whether they're going to wait until a wider proportion of the population, perhaps 75%, are vaccinated, which in the case of Germany, France, for example, not until October. If that's the case, that misses the key summer flying season for the passenger business. And then more broadly, as you can see from the top, there's a much slower rollout particularly in the emerging economies, which will mean that many travel barriers are likely to stay closed. And you can see in the next slide the measures of travel restrictiveness. So you can see compared to January last year, where there weren't any restrictions, it's not quite as bad as it was in the depths of the crisis last year, but travel restrictions are still extremely high. And that means that the international passenger business and the aircraft that would normally carry cargo haven't been able to get back in any meaningful numbers. And this has caused a bit of caused a significant capacity issue for the cargo business. And if we look at the next slide, you can see what's happened to overall capacity. So the red bars show capacity growth for the freighter fleet, which has been good. Freighters have been really highly utilized, both in hours flown and new freighters coming on into the fleet. But there's obviously a limit to that. And the passenger fleet, as you can see from the blue bars, well down still. The black bar shows the overall capacity available for cargo. And as you can see, still perhaps 20% down on a year ago. What that's meant is, if we move to the next slide, is that other means have had to have been looked into. So airlines have been very innovative. They've been using passenger aircraft to carry cargo, not just the holds, but the upper deck, so-called freighters, which have actually been quite an important source of capacity to transport cargo over the last. These are 2020 figures. So on some of these Middle East segments, freighters, passenger aircraft used for cargo, not the sort of typical hold cargo, have represented perhaps 20% of many of those markets. So quite a significant contribution has been made. But if we move to the next slide, the result of the capacity difficulties has been that yields have been very elevated, as you can see from the blue line here. They've come down a bit, but they're still perhaps 50% above normal. Obviously, for airlines, that means that revenues are strong, and that combines with that rising volume number you can see below. So moving to the next slide, Revenues, the blue line, have been growing very significantly, and particularly when you look at cargo revenues for the airline industry relative to the collapse in passenger revenues, that has sort of transformed the importance of cargo for a typical airline. The green bars there show the percentage of total revenues that cargo revenues represent for the industry, i.e. a typical airline. Pre-COVID-19, that was 10 or 15% of the typical airline business. They're now around about 1/3 of revenues, and we think that's going to continue this year, slightly less so, but it's still 30% of the typical airline business. So cargo has become much more important for the finances, the success of particular airline companies. And if we move to the next and last slide, actually cargo has been really important for sustaining connectivity, for sustaining some long-haul services. And what we did here, we looked at 3 route areas, and we modeled but essentially the cash operating revenues and costs for 777-300 with what we know has been happening to the passenger revenues, which are much shrunken. Those blue bars are much smaller for the passenger business. And these markets used to be sustained by the business passenger, the revenues from business passengers, which have gone to a very small level. But cargo is now essentially either making these routes cash break even or even cash positive. And so cargo is actually now playing a really important role in keeping services on some long haul routes going, with benefits to the passenger business and the wider economy as well. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for this very interesting topic and figures that are really essential as we move forward and look into the perspective of the overall rollout of the vaccine. So much appreciated. And there is as well a lot of information that is available on our website and as well on the Economical app. So if people are interested to get more insights, we strongly recommend them to reach out to our IATA website. So thank you very much, Brian. That leaves us, and when we're talking about rollout of vaccines, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Munir Bouazza, who's a COVID-19 vaccine global logistics lead for UNICEF. And he will go through and provide us an update on the vaccine rollout under the COVAX facility. Munir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and good afternoon or good morning, everybody joining this call. So pleased to be invited to the third session, basically that has already started with the first round that we have also shared the very first update. So we're happy to provide some of the additional developments and particularly establish some of the linkages on the work that we have been doing on the preparedness stage already last year and link it to where we are now and see how that actually links up to the cargo and air freight industry as well in the end of the presentation. But before that, I just wanted to give a bit of an update that is quite generic to all COVAX operations. So with that, the first slides basically illustrates the COVID-19 vaccines and COVAX portfolio development, which is based on either the vaccines and vaccine manufacturing sites that have obtained the WHO approval and are being used for the global distribution efforts for administration to the different populations with focus on the most vulnerable populations in each of the countries that are part of the COVAX. And here we're talking about 190 countries, not only what we call the AMC countries that are supported by the COVAX facility, but also some of the high-income countries as well that are part of the COVAX facility, with the aim to ensure the equitable and fair distribution of the vaccines. So this is just showing the main 3 vaccines that we are distributing, such as the AstraZeneca, SK, SII, and Pfizer, and also the next 2 that are also in the pipeline and will be starting very soon, hopefully. Basically, the first few months, as it's shown in the next slide, has been reflecting the exact sort of forecast or expectations that we've had from the supply availability constraints, which is basically due to 2 main factors. The first one is mostly the number of manufacturers that would have their vaccines approved, which is still relatively small compared to the demand, and that has also been reflected in the number of doses that we've managed to also secure and deliver to countries. And also the second one is mostly around the scale up of production. So obviously the manufacturers, with the start of production of the COVID-19 vaccines, follow a certain development curve and increase in their production capacity. So that is also something that we'll foresee in combination of the number of vaccines that will have their vaccines approved with WHO, both lead to a significant increase in the second half of the year. So basically the model that we're using now, with small shipments going to different countries, like over 100 countries, will be slightly changing to basically cover multiple manufacturing sites and higher volumes per shipments to the countries. So that is basically reflecting 2 different scenarios between the first half of the year and the second half of 2021. And then the next slide basically reflects the parallel also efforts through some of the vaccine diplomacy that's been going on from the different governments who basically own some of the manufacturing capacity, particularly in China, in India, in Europe, and also in the US. And this is also an information that we keep track of to make sure that our global equity and fairness efforts are done jointly with the ongoing dose sharing efforts and vaccine diplomacy that is happening on a bilateral basis, to make sure that no country is left behind. And the information is again based on some of the information that is publicly available, and is shared also on UNICEF websites. And then the next slides mostly focuses on the progress to date, covering not only COVAX or bilateral deals, but also the progress in the vaccine administration in the different countries, which is also something that we keep in mind when we establish the priorities for the distribution and prioritize the countries that have not received the doses that they would actually need in comparison with the developments in other countries. And this is information that is mostly managed and monitored on a regular basis by colleagues in the World Health Organization, WHO. Next one is around some of the key supply issues that we have been keeping track of, and making sure that we establish the necessary measures to make sure that we mitigate some of the risks related to administration of the vaccines as well as distribution, to make sure that we are aligned with our initial objectives as part of the COVAX facility. So some of them are related to the vaccine rollout, and this is where basically we're talking about the country readiness that has been initiated already last year with the respective governments that are part of COVAX to ensure readiness and vaccination plans and prioritization is in place. So this is also being monitored on a daily basis with our working group on country readiness. We're talking about this sufficient vaccine, and this is basically what I have highlighted in terms of the overall availability of supply and vaccines that everybody is facing. But we hope that this will gradually shift to a higher vaccine availability scenario in the second half of the year. And obviously the COVAX operationalization, I mean, as you know, we have this huge global partnership that is led by WHO, Gavi, CEPI, and UNICEF is coordinating the procurement and the delivery of these together with our colleagues in PAHO, who are focusing on the Americas region. And this is obviously like a machine that has been working 24/7 to make sure the objectives that have been set are in progress, and are on the same wavelength in terms of synchronization of efforts of all the parties involved as well as the governments. I think the funding also is one of the critical success criteria for this. As you know, that Gavi and COVAX facility are pursuing the efforts to make sure that the objective of delivering the 2 billion doses is met, and for that, obviously, there is a dependency towards funding. For now, it's not a showstopper in our operations, but for us to continue these efforts throughout the 2021 and also beyond that, maybe in 2022, the funding efforts need to follow. But it's great to see the enthusiasm and the support from the different governments and partners in this. And then the next slide here, coming to specifically the top priorities for us as part of the COVAX facility, and to make sure that we remove some of the barriers that we continue to advocate against, and make sure that we get the support from different stakeholders at the very highest levels to ensure the equitable and fair distribution of the vaccines. And the first one is in line with the vaccine availability, where besides the approval of the vaccines and increase of capacity, there is a high level advocacy on simplifying the intellectual property rights, so that basically the COVID-19 vaccines is basically made available to different manufacturing plants and existing capacity, so that we increase basically the supply levels compared to the existing demand. The second one is around the number of challenges that we've had and we've been advocating for, like in terms of ending vaccine nationalism. As you might see in the map, there is a general tendency that number of governments, either at a national level or regional level, basically give priorities to their local populations, even beyond the vulnerable population. And this is where WHO and the different partners reiterated on the fact that equity and fairness is key in the success of the fight against the COVID-19. And this is where we need to make sure that all countries globally follow the same trend in percentage of vaccine coverage, so that we protect not only specific countries, but also protect the wider population globally, with focus on the most vulnerable, with health workers and the most vulnerable and fragile populations, of course. And that's basically leading to the last point, which is around the equal access to vaccine supplies, which we can't advocate enough towards, and that goes hand in hand with the first two elements that are really, really high on the priority for our advocacy efforts. Next slide. Despite all the constraints that we've highlighted earlier, it's important to also focus on some of the achievements that we have delivered so far, where to date we have been able to deliver to over 117 countries, if we count some of the shipments that are arriving also today. And that is quite a big achievement, considering that we have been facing all the challenges in terms of availability, some of the logistics challenges as well, and also at destination. But this is basically an effort that is made jointly, not only with the partners that are leading the COVAX, but also with the manufacturers that are supporting us on this, as well as the partners airlines that have been extremely supportive in the distribution efforts, but as well as the coordination with different partners on the ground in the countries to make sure that not only the shipments are delivered, but also the vaccines are administered timely to the target population. The next slide is basically a similar view, which just adds basically the different sort of split between manufacturers as well as some of the countries, and the information again is made public and is live information also on UNICEF portal for COVID-19 distribution. The next slide here refers to one of the slides that we had shared already in the first presentation that took place, or was coordinated again as part of the IATA COVID-19 sessions, where we have clearly articulated the needs, from logistics industry, but also specifically from the airline and cargo airline industry, with focus on access, on capacity, on priority, on reasonable pricing, and also on quality of transport, as well as schedule reliability. I think what stands out from the efforts that has been translated in the humanitarian air freight initiative that we have launched already in February and March, where a significant number of airlines have joined us and signed these MOUs to prioritize the COVID-19 vaccine shipments as well as the related supplies, because we tend to also forget all the devices and syringes and cold chain equipments that are really, really needed also for the success of the implementation. So the one that stands out also is the transport schedule reliability, and I can mention that all the 117 countries that have been delivered, we were particularly impressed with the ratio of 100% schedule reliability, especially considering the current circumstances. So which basically illustrates and give us actually confidence that the airline industry has been prepared, has understood the requirements, and basically gives us confidence for the even more challenging period that will be coming, hopefully in the second half of the year, with more vaccine availability and also going towards 2022. I think on the main, like, I don't know, more on the downside part, I would like to maybe highlight two elements. I mean, the first one is on the reasonable pricing. I mean, we of course understand that the cargo is one of the main sources of revenue, as was highlighted by Brian in his previous presentation. But of course, we need to take into account the investment that's required from delivering the vaccines to not only fight the COVID-19 vaccine, but also the economical impact on economies, but also on the airline industry, and make sure that the reasonable pricing levels are granted for vaccines, especially considering the funding constraints. And also linked to that, I wanted to highlight that we have opened the floor not only for the commercial collaboration that is quite successful, but also for any forms of partnerships in the form of in-kind donations of cargo space or flexible sort of cargo space donations as well. And to date, I mean, I regret to say that we haven't received any from airlines at the moment, but we have indeed received support from other partners, freight forwarding companies, for example. So this is just to say that we would like to see the development on both fronts, on the commercial that is already ongoing successfully with a much deeper collaboration, but as well as on the partnership side and any potential opportunities for potential collaboration on partnership levels. And then the next slide is just to highlight some of the future engagements with airlines, and this is more on bilateral basis whenever challenges are being faced, either on capacity front, on service availability, and also some of the information sharing, and also the needed targeted solutions for countries with access constraints. So far, the airlines have been very responsive on the ad hoc collaboration and exchanges. And to date, I think the overall lead time from cargo readiness until delivery in country has been quite impressive, where we're talking about almost an average of 72 hours, which also includes the transit time, which is quite a record for handling of vaccines. And then maybe to conclude with the last slide, basically illustrates just the open door, the gratitudes that we express to IATA and also to the airline partners on the efforts and the support, and you know, our hope for the continuous successful collaboration going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munir, for this insight information. And I think one element which is very clear is the ongoing effort and the partnership, and that there's always ways of improving. But it's very positive to identify that it's going well, and it's going to keep on that side. Good. So I'll like to invite our next speaker, because we're looking at partnership, and one of the key elements as well is collaboration, and the proven efficiency of collaboration, especially on the whether it's airport communities or associations. I'm really pleased to introduce Jay-Z Yip, Cargo Logistic Development at Changi Airport, as well representing Pharma.io today and providing us on how air cargo responded to the COVID-19 vaccine global distribution. Jay-Z, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Andre. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So hope everyone is doing fine and keeping safe. Before I kick off my presentation, representing Pharma.io, I would like to extend our gratitude to IATA for letting us present at this esteemed webinar. Now, I'm sure every one of you have recalled this important date, 2nd December 2020. That is when Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines first got emergency use authorization by the UK Health Authority. So this actually kick-started the global COVID-19 vaccines distribution in a way. So several months back, sometime in June and July last year, as we saw some of the vaccine candidates rushing towards the later stage of the clinical trials, there was actually a wake-up call by the global air cargo supply chain. And there were questions whether we are ready and prepared for this logistical challenge. So today, my presentation, let us examine how air cargo industry has responded to this logistical mission, and have we done adequately. Next slide, please. So at the beginning, there was unprecedented level of urgencies, uncertainties, as well as unknowns in the COVID-19 vaccines manufacturing as well as distribution. The previous slide, please. So what we saw is that I think everyone of us are aware that the COVID-19 vaccines are being developed in a breakneck speed. In fact, 4 times acceleration than any preceding vaccines. We also saw there are many vaccines candidates in the race. So as of today, what we saw from WHO is that there are over 215 vaccines in development. At the same time, the vaccines are developed in different platforms. So as of today, there are about 10 vaccine platforms. So what does that mean for the air cargo industry last year? There was limited time for logistics players to react, to prepare resources, and to invest in infrastructure. And secondly, as I mentioned, there were also a long list of unknowns. There were unknowns regarding packaging of the vaccines. We are not sure whether the vaccines will be transported in active or passive containers, whether dry ice will be used, and how much dry ice will be used, the transportation as well as the handling conditions. And also, there were very little information on the manufacturing and the filling side. For airlines to start preparing the trade lanes as well as to ensure sufficient air cargo capacity. The previous slide, please. So given these unknowns and uncertainties, yet the global COVID-19 vaccine distribution mission demands our air cargo industry to deliver in the highest degree of speed, security, reliability, as well as transparency. Andre, next slide, please. So with regards to speed, we have seen requirements on guaranteed transit time as well as minimize unexpected delays. We are also expected to minimize, or in fact, not to have any temperature excursion as well as deviation. On the security front, we were expected to deliver the COVID-19 vaccine in the highest form of security to prevent illicit trades, beverages, counterfeits, and even cyber attacks. And on the transparency front, there were also requirements for real-time or near-time tracking and monitoring of the shipments. And there were also requests on information on air freight capacity, as well as the lead time per trade lane. And last but not least, also information on the cold chain capabilities, as well as capacity in each of the origin, transit, and destination hubs. Next slide. So similarly, our air cargo industry also had the jittery start, and we also have similar concerns as the vaccines manufacturers. There were concerns on temperature excursions, the lack of visibility provision, and whether there is adequate cold chain infrastructure as well as capacity, and whether the entire air cargo supply chain is coordinated to prevent unexpected delay as well as security concerns. Next slide, please. So in view of all these concerns and challenges, that is when in August last year, Pharma.Aero together with TIACA, we collaborated on a global initiative called Project Sunrays. The objective of Project Sunrays is to create transparency between the vaccine manufacturers as well as the global air cargo industry. At the same time, we also hope to deliver a useful guidelines for the air cargo industry in order to deliver the vaccine in a safe, reliable, and effective manner. So since then, Project Sunray comprised of 4 work packages, and we have since published 2 white papers, which include very detailed fact sheets on some of the major vaccines manufacturers. If you have not seen our white paper, I would encourage you to go to either of our website to download the two white papers. Next slide. Now, as part of Project Sunrays, we have actually rolled out a air freight readiness survey. In fact, 2 rounds, the first round in September and the second in November. So back in September, we were quite concerned about the responses that we have received, as only 28% of the respondents were feeling well prepared and well informed about the COVID-19 vaccine supply chain requirements. And more importantly, we saw that airports and ground handlers scored the lowest in this survey. Inevitably so, because we do have indirect relationship with the vaccine manufacturers. Now, 2 months down the road, when we re-roll out the survey, we were quite heartened to see that the score has gone up. In fact, 46% of the respondents are telling us that they felt more prepared and more informed with more information emerging over time. And in particular, we also saw the score by ground handlers improved the most. Next slide, please. Now, above and beyond standards, processes, adequate cold chain infrastructure and capacity, skilled manpower, effective COVID-19 vaccine distribution requires open communication across the entire air cargo supply chain, as well as strong collaboration, both locally as well as globally. When we look at the survey responses, we observed that the respondents that indicated the highest readiness score, their winning formula is as such. Firstly, they have set up an internal dedicated team to look after the COVID-19 vaccine transportation. And these teams are actually led by their C-level executive. At the same time, the teams are cross-divisional and also across different geographical markets. And secondly, we also saw that this group of respondents, they collaborate with vaccine manufacturers very early. They have early communication and dialogues with them. And last but not least, they also started collaborating and sharing information with their supply chain partners along the way. Next slide, please. And since late last year, we have also seen several air cargo communities establishing joint task force as a way to strengthen the local level collaboration. So some of the examples, including in Brussels Airport, that is the Procure Task Force. In Edmonton, in Canada, that is the CIV Cargo Community Ready Task Force. In Hong Kong, that is the HKIA Community Task Force for COVID-19 vaccines handling. Miami, we saw the MayaVac Task Force, the Changi Ready Task Force in Singapore, as well as Hope Consortium, amongst many other local air cargo communities. Next slide, please. So what do these air cargo communities share in common? First and foremost, there were clear local air cargo communities objectives that were set right at the start that is aligned with all the members of the task force. Secondly, most of these task forces are extremely inclusive. Not only they invite the logistics players, but public authorities are also invited, such as the health authorities, local customs, border control, and even airport security agencies. Thirdly, they also see equal importance with global collaboration. They're also collaborating with like-minded air cargo hubs, as well as other international organizations. These communities also recognize that the first batch of vaccines are just the beginning. With every new vaccine shipment that they handle, there are new learnings, and it is an iterative exercise. And last but not least, we recognize that it's very important for these communities to build trust as well as coordination. Next slide, please. Now, following Project Sunrays, Pharma.Aero continue to engage our members to get the latest situational updates from them. So just a few weeks ago, we have rolled out a survey to our members. And what we have found out is that the majority of the members which have started handling the vaccine shipments are already either part of an internal task force and or part of a local air cargo community task force. Next slide, please. And one key general observation that we made is that organizations that have continuously invested in standards cold chain infrastructure over the last couple of years are seeing returns and payback during this period. And so what are some of the actual action plans and measures that have been implemented by some of the air cargo stakeholders? To address the concerns of speed, we have seen some of our members working with the airport authorities to assign parking bays that is close to the cargo terminals in order to ensure very reliable handling on the tarmac. They also work very closely with customs authorities to expedite the custom clearance process. In fact, some of the air cargo hub, we have seen green lanes that are being established for the COVID-19 vaccines clearance. On reliability, most of the air cargo communities have also started mapping out their cold chain capacity and capabilities right from the start. We have also seen a few airlines introducing unique commodity code for COVID-19 vaccines as well as COVAX shipments. And in Brussels, we also saw Brussels Airport with Air Cargo Belgium, instituting a COVID-19 tailored SOP guidelines, and then followed by validation of the guidelines with their community. And recently, they have issued a Blue Cure readiness label for organizations in adherence to these guidelines. On the security front, most of the air cargo stakeholders have actually conducted an internal security risk assessment for the COVID-19 vaccine shipments. And we have also seen auxiliary police deployed for apron transportations. And between airport to warehouse, we have also seen police escort. Last but not least, when it comes to transparencies, some of the airlines have implemented pre-shipment notifications for their supply chain partners. There are also some airports that are implementing community data sharing solution to offer higher transparency across for all the pharma shipments. Next slide, please. At the same time, we have also seen some of our members have made new investment on cold chain infrastructures and capabilities. Some of them have invested in additional cool rooms. Some have prepared an area in the apron for airside staging area in order to facilitate air-to-air transshipment of the vaccines. We have also seen ground handlers and airports investing in more crew dollies to ensure safe handling of the vaccines on tarmac. And last but not least, also investment by different stakeholders in temperature loggers as well as data sharing platforms. Next slide, please. So the big question is, are all the challenges and concerns behind us and it's over? I guess not. I think just now the previous speaker has also mentioned about the current vaccines production challenges, which is also partly also due to the shortages in raw materials as well as manpower challenges, which also leads to volatile delivery schedule. And the industry is also telling us that there could be higher visibility on some of the shipment information, including packaging, dry ice requirement, the amount of dry ice in each packaging, the shelf life of packaging, and what is the maximum transportation time for some of the vaccine shipment. We also saw that there are ad hoc adjustments to flight schedule because of the production challenges and some of the dynamic airline schedule. And last but not least, there is still room for improvement for deeper collaboration amongst industry stakeholders. Next slide, please. Now, following Project Sunrays, in order to create more transparency for the industry, Pharma.Aero and Kiata will be jointly rolling out a regular industry newsletter to keep our members abreast of the latest developments, updates, as well as insights. So do look forward to our upcoming first edition of the newsletter. Next slide, please. I have come to the end of my presentation, but before I go, I just want to leave everyone with this adage, which to me, I feel that it is very important. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. With that, over to you, Andre.
Thank you very much, JZ, for this very interesting information and sharing experience, especially on this collaborative effort, which is, I think, one key element, and it was a call for action in terms of collaboration and coordination, and that's a really good example. Just for information, we'll be addressing questions at the end of all three presentations during our panel and Q&A. I see that there are a number of different questions that came into the tool already, so we'll try to address them. But stay with us. We'll do that during the panel session and the Q&A. So we are moving to our last presentation, and that will be Jennifer Hay, Head of Specialty Products for Americas at United Cargo, who will actually share a proactive effort in fulfilling the mission of quick vaccine distribution. I think there'll be some very interesting lessons learned from the airline side. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning to everybody. Good afternoon and good evening. Before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank Andrea, Maria, and the rest of the IATA team for letting us talk about what United Cargo has done to support the movement of vaccines and the extremely important materials that support them. We also wanted to make sure that we didn't disrupt the normal flows of our pharmaceuticals that are out there. So thank you guys. Next slide, please. As we all know, it was really no surprise that COVID-19 was going to be a huge impact for the airline. It was truly the worst case scenario since 9/11, and pretty much overnight in the month of March to April, we saw passenger demand fall by almost 100%. It was quite unfortunate. A lot of our vendors, our partners, a lot of our amazing and very tenured colleagues had to be furloughed across the industry, which in turn, of course, caused issues with staffing, hours of operation, and we really had to find a way to fix that going forward. We all know that we work in a very compliant, very complex regulatory framework, and there's a lot of unpredictability. We all started hearing the words of social distancing, and as an airline, a passenger airline, it's key to try to figure out how do we keep people in seats while we're still preparing for that social distancing requirements. I think, as Brian mentioned, there were a lot of high fixed costs that we had to start looking at, and we had to really try to figure out how do we keep airlines going when we really didn't have the passengers to support it. So what we did is we looked at building a skeleton and networks from scratch, and we really looked to see how we could support everybody going forward. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, overnight, United Airlines schedule pretty much dropped from about 5,000 flights per day to only 6 international flights within 24 hours. Next slide, please. So what did this mean? We had to keep the cargo moving. We wanted to make sure all of those frontline health workers continue to receive their supplies. We knew, as I mentioned in my first slide, we wanted to keep the cold chain moving. There's a lot of very important pharma, medicines, vaccines outside of COVID that we needed to keep moving. And we really need to find a way that the cargo industry needed to, quote unquote, play airline and set up what we actually call freight-only flights, but what industry notices as freighters. Next slide, please. So what did we do? It's nice to hear from my colleagues prior to me that there's a lot of the same efforts going on out there. And one of the key things that I've heard throughout everybody's presentation is collaboration and working together. So that's what we did at United Cargo. We created a COVID vaccine readiness task force pretty much the summer after COVID really hit. And it was really started within the cargo division itself because we knew after hearing it was going to take 8,000 flights to move these vaccines around the world, we needed to get a game plan together. The nice thing is, within a week or two of this effort that we were starting at the cargo piece of our business actually expanded into a company-wide effort. So we started working with the company as a whole, not just as our cargo individually. We looked at creating structures, different processes, and making sure we were remaining aligned while keeping our fixed costs in thoughts and making sure our cross-divisional efforts were really focused on providing a safe, operational, and secure way of handling these vaccines going forward. We knew these were life-saving flows, and we wanted to make sure that we can continue to support this while making sure that we didn't actually disrupt anything else that we were running. Next slide, please. So what did we do? Let's break it down a little bit. So as I mentioned, we started as a team within Cargo, but it definitely expanded very quickly across several teams within United. There are so many parts and pieces to an airline, as we all know. We have our network team, our flight, IT, security. Security was a big part of this, being part of the regulatory environment. We wanted to make sure that everybody had a seat at the table. We looked at things like special handling codes. I think Jay-Z mentioned this. We actually have 2 different handling codes, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but they were really focused on knowing when our COVID vaccines or any of the peripherals were going to be on flight, so they would have the highest speed, highest security, and in all cases, the highest visibility within United Cargo. We looked at handling procedures. We all know the cargo comes in, we have to move it from point A to point B, but we want to make sure the minute it gets to destination that we're able to deliver it, get it on that truck, and get it into that patient's arm. We also looked at our control tower, something that we've been doing for many, many years. We were able to pull out a team within our TC control tower and actually set it up specific to vaccine bookings. And of course, the one thing that we're all very proud about is the ability to actually increase our maximum dry ice limit. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this was really key for us in being able to move one of the very first shipments of vaccines over from Europe into the US. And of course, cool storage. We've all heard the stories about we have our 2 to 8, we have our 15 to 25. But as we start moving a lot of these vaccines, there's a lot more requirements in order to keep them frozen before they get into the arms of a patient. The interesting thing about this, we've been, I think, all in this now for a little over 1 year, and we continue to meet twice a week, our COVID Readiness Task Force, just to give updates, to celebrate wins, and to continue to collaborate together to ensure that we're making the correct decisions for our customers. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one of the critical paths that we had to look at was the distribution of vaccines. How do we get them over from one place to another? And we knew as a passenger airline, there were some very specific requirements that we had to meet in order to place dry ice onto our flights. So what did that mean? We started looking at all of our aircraft across the board and determining which aircraft was best for us to, all right, we want to work with the regulators, we want to work with everybody across the board. Which aircraft do we want to focus on in order to increase that dry ice? This really came down to true collaboration within the industry and within our organization itself. We had inter-airline discussions with our JV partners, with our inter-airline partners. We looked at policies, we looked at procedures. We worked with the shippers, with the freight forwarders, and we even worked with the packaging companies so we could understand what the requirements were to keep those vaccines at the temperatures that they required. And again, we found out the one thing, it's truly important for us to make sure that we're having that collaboration between the shipper, the packaging company, because it's the only way we're going to get to where we need to go. So with that said, I am happy to announce, I'm sure many of you had seen it, in the second half of November of last year, United was able to actually increase their dry ice to about 15,000 pounds on the aircraft. And we brought in a little under 1 million doses from Brussels into Chicago last year. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about some of the special handling codes. I think it's been nice to hear that this is something that has been adopted across the industry. We've actually implemented 2 special handling codes. The first one, CVD, which is very focused on our COVID-19 vaccines, and in some cases, elements that are going to help create those vaccines when they get into country. This has our highest boarding priority and the most oversight to ensure visibility across all of our divisions within our company. We also found it's extremely important to put another code in, our CV2, which basically gives us all the peripherals, the support materials, the test kits, even things such as APIs can go into this CV2 booking code, and also looking at PPE. We all know that in March, April, and May of last year, PPE shipments went through the roof, and this really got us thinking to make sure that we could support these going forward. With these shipping codes, we also, as Jay-Z mentioned, we're sending out daily notifications of where they're going, who they're going to, what flights they're on. So what that does is it gives us the notifications at a very high level, so we have the ability to monitor them and make sure that they're flying as booked. Next slide, please. So I go back to what I was saying before. The CVD, getting those vaccines in everybody's arms is extremely important, but we cannot forget those CV2 shipments, all the peripherals, and also traditional pharma shipments. Everybody, we still have our cancer fighting, we still have our diabetes medications, all that stuff still has to get out there. So we really did work together as a team in order to make sure that we were able to support our customers on the COVID vaccines, but still making sure that we could support our ongoing flows as well. We see that vaccines are starting to get into people's arms, but there's still numbers out there that none of us want to see. We're starting to see several versions of the COVID out there. We have different variants in Brazil, over in Europe. So we definitely want to make sure that we're continuing the movement of all those support items outside of just the vaccines. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do looking forward? Next slide. There's definitely some key lessons learned as we worked through this as a company and as an industry. Again, we go back to cooperation was key within the entire airline and within the entire industry. We really had to become that agile, flexible organization where not everything is always black and white. We need to make sure that we have the ability to stay safe, to stay compliant, but also move the cargo that we need to in order to get those vaccines out there. We're not in the same, we all are in the same boat and we're all in the same storm. The key thing that I learned from working within the industry over the last year or so is the airlines and the forwarders were very, very prepared for the movement of vaccines. And that tripartite discussion between the airlines, the forwarders, and the pharma companies were key for such things as knowing that we need to increase our storage capabilities, knowing that our dry ice needs are going to need to go up and we need to put our -20 storage capability in there. The other thing that has been very interesting, especially as we start putting in the CVD, the CV2, is seeing that a lot of these vaccine shipments do require a lot of attention and dedication. Like I said, we've really set this up for success at having this at the highest possible level within United, and we want to make sure that these move as booked. Going back to, I think, a message from all of my colleagues on here, communication has been key. And we just have to make sure that we can work together, stay compliant, and make sure that we're doing what we need to do. We all know that the airline industry is going to bounce back. We all want to go out. We all want to see each other at some point, but it is going to be a long and painful process. And the continued collaboration within the organization and within the industry is going to make that happen. Next slide, please. So I have to definitely look at some of the achievements that we've achieved over the last year. March of 2020, I think, really hit us hard. And nobody really knew it was going to go, but the United Cargo team got together working with the airline as a whole, and we have some amazing, amazing numbers that we can share. You guys can see these in front of you, but one of the key ones I'd like to highlight is that almost 12,000 cargo-only flights were operated worldwide. Our FOFs, or as you folks also know them as Praters. We had critical medical shipments going all over the world, and then we also had cargo moving on those cargo-only flights. We continued to keep the supply chain moving when everything else came to a stop. Next slide, please. So with that said, I would like to offer you guys one last comment, and I will read this. We all know the airline industry is going to return to normal, but that's going to happen when we reach herd immunity. As an airline and as an industry, we have that obligation to support the effort the most quickly and efficiently way as we can. As an industry, we work together. We're going to continue to work together, and we're going to continue to keep these vaccines moving and do what we need to in order to bring this crisis to an end. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your time. Look forward to answering questions on the panel.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you for your information and detailed information as well on how proactivity can lead to successful results. That leads us to, I'm sure the audience have a number of questions. I have some questions for you as well. So I'd like to kick off the panel, and I would like to ask the presenters today, Munir, Jay-Z, Jennifer, who will actually be accompanied by a number of different other panelists. Manu Jacobs, Managing Director, Specialist Product at United Cargo, that will join the panel. But as well Eddie Weigert, Transportation Manager Pfizer, and Terence Sell, Terry, Global Pharma Product Manager, Air Logistics at Kühne + Nagel. So, do I have everyone? I think I'm missing Eddie. I know he's connected, so I'm sure he'll join. Eddie, are you here? First of all, welcome Terry, welcome Manu as well. So as Eddie's joining, let me maybe just give a first quick question to Terry. He hasn't had the chance to share his views and from a freight forwarding company, I mean Kühne + Nagel, and from examples of major vaccine shipments your company oversaw. What were the key lessons learned from that you can share with the audience today?
So I think from my perspective, we've heard some common words being used throughout all the presentations. I think we've had to redefine the words that we use. So when we talk about being proactive, making sure that we have solutions already in place based upon limited information that we have. When we talk about agility, we had to increase our agility both on the quality compliance as well as on the process and handling side. Preparation, forward stocking. We had to do some forward stocking of packaging for customers and think differently about how we procured sizable investments like warehousing. So I think from our perspective, we learned we had to redefine ourselves a little bit as how we do business with our customers, our partners, and how we use the words a little bit differently moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a key element, and I think there is one question, a burning question that I have actually, and that links a little bit to the historical relationship between manufacturer with a freight forwarder and freight forwarder airline, and I think that crisis has really demonstrated the fact that there is a need to open up those communication and going beyond the bilateral. And we've seen as well when it comes to the example of UNICEF and what Munir was sharing earlier, the direct contact with the airlines, airlines directly contacting or being contacted by manufacturers. I think this is something I would wish to see increasing in the way forward, because I think it allows better transparency. But it's always situations that are put in place in terms of crisis. But do you see, and that's Terry, Jennifer, or Manu, from the airline perspective and from the freight forwarding perspective, and as well I'll ask Munir, do you see that moving forward happening on a more normal basis?
Andrea, if I may take this, to start with, yes, absolutely is the short answer. I believe that we already live in a world where the forwarder, the manufacturer, and the airline talk. I would like to point out and stress, let us absolutely not forget the airports, the ground handlers, and the regulators. And I think that was a lesson learned, at least on our side. I mean, you can be the best airline in the world, you can be the best forwarder in the world, but at origin, potentially in transit, and at destination, you need the full cooperation of, let's say, the other parties that I just mentioned.
No, I agree with you, Manu, and I think that there is an increased requirement for visibility across the entire supply chain. So as customers, shippers are looking into this, they want to know what the capabilities are. They want to see and validate the capabilities. So I don't see it going backwards. I see it's one of the things that will continue out of the pandemic situation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Munir, maybe just a question for you as well, and I'm looking at the questions that have been shared in the by the audience, and we're talking about the accessibility of vaccines to countries that potentially have cannot be directly accessed from our regions. That remains a challenge. But it seems that as well, there has been some reports that in some of the countries, some of the doses have potentially had to be destroyed because of reaching the expiration date. How do we see that, or how do you see that moving forward in terms of the availability accessing those countries versus potentially having those doses that might need to be, that have potentially an expiration date?
Yeah, I think I'm picking here 2 points. The first one is around countries with access constraints. And then the second one is about maybe the shelf life and some of the challenges around it. I think on the first one, and this is also linking up to the let's say tripartite collaboration again that Terry and Manu highlighted. That as part of the preparedness, the mapping of these countries has been done in advance and remain to be maintained in a dynamic manner so that we keep track of countries that are under total lockdown, where there are no flights, and we have concrete examples, for example, with like Timor-Leste, or we have like a shipment that is on the way now to Mongolia, for example, where basically we have identified these bottlenecks in advance together with the partner airlines and also thanks to the freight forwarders for the coordination and market intelligence on that. And that is basically the key solution, is that using the exception management and focusing on these countries to find proactive solutions in advance before even the goods readiness, then that facilitates the flow and avoids any delays. And I think the second point touches more on the global collaboration efforts. I mean, unfortunately, we have seen some of the doses being destroyed, particularly for some of the bilateral. We haven't experienced that ourselves, and that is mostly due to some of the coordination efforts and change in priorities, knowing that all vaccines at this stage have a significantly lower shelf life compared to the routine vaccines, which means that the planning and the direct delivery to countries and also to the population's arms is a must. Delivering to countries and then having to redirect them to others, etc., is not an option now. So we have to, in addition to the agility that Terry was referring to, we need to make sure that the preparedness and planning is done in a lean way, so that not only like cost and time, but also the shorten the time between readiness and delivery to countries to leave sufficient time for the actual implementation and administration of the vaccines.
Thank you, Monia. I know it's not an easy question. I appreciate. We have Eddie as well with us. His unfortunate camera is not working, but Eddie, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Perfect. We can hear you as well. Thank you so much for taking the time as well and being present at this event. I know that on the manufacturing side, things are quite hectic because all eyes are on you. So thank you for joining. And maybe I think one of the first question I'd like to ask you is, as the industry was getting prepared and ready for the large scale of the transport and distribution of vaccines, with some of the delays that occurred on the manufacturing side, there's been a seamless logistics that happened, which is positive on that sense. But how do you see from a manufacturing side and your views the industry's preparedness in response to the COVID-19 vaccine rollout?
Can I just start by saying that we actually did not really have a delay. in production.
No, it was not specifically for Pfizer and stuff like that.
I don't know.
Good that you're precise. Thank you.
So I think on that first question, the majority of the reply was actually already found in JC's presentation, which I think was excellent. Thank you. In addition to that, I would say prior to this, or at the start of this, the industry was not ready, yeah, which is in it, as a matter of fact, not illogical neither. But they picked up quite rapidly, and as from the point where we see it now, we can say we're actually quite happy with the changes.
Okay, good. And so I think there was some instrumental action as well as we've seen the first rollout of the vaccines from Belgium into the US with United flights, and with that proactivity, working with regulators. I think, do you see that potentially, and it's a question as well to the different panelists, moving towards as well a public-private partnership that is reinforced? We see that the regulators today are often, or we have seen as the crisis was going on, they didn't want to be pointed as being the bottlenecks or the ones hindering it. So do you see this private public partnership maybe reinforced as we go forward?
I hope so, because it's a bit unfortunate that it took the pandemic to actually get people to finally come together. As we had the conversations with United, I was also wondering when we brought up the aspect of the dry ice, if this would have not been driven by that global need and that common goal, would this ever have happened? Yeah, that's number one. Now that we have seen that happening, then begs the question, can we maintain this? Can we further develop these for other types of air freight that are maybe not even vaccine, but have very specific requirements?
Indeed. So maybe another panelist would like to comment on this private-public partnership. JZ, you mentioned it as well during your presentation, that authorities are part of the community as well, because they are key element within the efficiencies of collaborating. Would you like maybe to share a little bit on that?
Maybe I think drawing experience from the Changi Railway Task Force, when we first formed this task force alongside with the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore. In fact, it is co-led by the Civil Aviation Authority as well as Changi Airport. When we called forth this community, the various authorities were very forthcoming in coming on board. The customs, the border control, and also the airport security agency. And back to the question about will the air cargo community continue in the same way, post COVID-19 vaccine distribution? I think in my humble opinion, I don't think the air cargo industry can continue to work in silo. I don't think there's any turning back when it comes to community collaboration and coordination. And only through open communication, as we can see from this crisis, and industry collaboration, that we can continuously improve our service to meet the growing demands of the various industries.
Thank you. Any other comments from one of the panelists?
Yes, and Andrea, I echo what I hear. When we started, let's say, this process, this was a little bit unknown, untapped territory for us. Getting changes of these kind with the regulators internally within the airline, normally in the old world would take 6 months, would take a year. So I think the communication and the openness, as transparent as anybody could be between the manufacturer, the packaging company, the forwarder, the airline, different divisions within all parties made, and of course, let's not forget the urgency, made, let's say, that this could be established in a relatively short time. And I would welcome, and this is also a lesson learned, I would welcome, let's say, that we should have and we need to have, let's say, these types of discussions, conversations more openly with one another. And Andrea, maybe there's a role for your organization and to get this to the next level as well.
Well, I think the call for action is definitely there. IATA will continue engaging and will continue supporting, and I think that's a very good point. I'm looking at the different questions as well that come from the audience. And we've seen, especially in terms of capacity and capabilities, or capacity and belly cargo capacity and freight capacity, a number of airlines that are actually as well taking the seats out of the cabin to include cargo within the cabin of a passenger aircraft. We've been discussing about the freighters, and one of the question is, like, as those operations are quite extensive and they seem to be to happen for a midterm, how long do you see this will continue on the use of freighters, and will those actually continue even once the passenger travel recovers and belly capacity returns? On maybe Manu or Jennifer?
Yeah, glad to take it, Andrea. Difficult question. I can only look, let's say, at what we are doing as United. We're looking at all options. So far, removing seats does not seem to be a very viable option for us at this moment, but all options are open. To your second question, we foresee within United and United Cargo that we will operate the freight-only flights, so the freighters, for the next couple of months, probably for the remainder of the year. We know, of course, that we are in the end a passenger airline, so the more passenger demand will bounce back, the less aircraft we will have, say, as a cargo division to play around in a very flexible way on projects, on charters, on specific projects. So it's gonna come likely probably to an end, let's say, the flexibility we currently have, and that is why, let's say, we are talking to our partners, talking with the forwarders to see what is expected to prepare for the future. And again, all options are still on the table.
Thank you, Manu. And you were talking about projects, and that's leading to a question to Jay-Z, and especially representing Pharma.io. I know that Pharma.io is looking always on addressing the current either challenges or opportunities. And with the membership that you have, and I think Pfizer and Eddie is as well member of Pharma.io, that brings a lot of value into understanding to what are the type of projects that would meet the actual and potential future demand. There are some projects within Pharma.io that are going to be initiated following the experience over this past year that you can share?
Yeah, that's correct. So just now in my presentation, I mentioned that an ongoing project that we are undergoing right now is to have a continued conversation with our members to understand some of the actual measures and action plans that they have put in place to handle the COVID-19 vaccines. As I mentioned just now, right, with every shipment, there are new lessons to be learned and also to share with the community. So that project will be ongoing. Secondly is what I have not addressed in my presentation earlier, right, is the challenges pertaining to last mile distribution, especially in remote and developing economies. So recently, Pharma.io has signed a MOU with the Humanitarian Logistics Association, HLA, with the intention to collaborate on potential projects. And one of the projects is actually using unmanned aerial vehicle to access to difficult places to convey, for example, the vaccines into these remote areas. So we hope that the project has kickstarted, and we hope that we can bring new insights for the industry.
Thank you. Quite interesting and very up to date. I mean, and remote access or remote areas, accessing remote areas is can be very difficult. And unmanned vehicles has been already been used at some other places, so experiences will be definitely interesting to, and the results of that project will definitely be very interesting to hear. A question as well in terms of logistics, and that's to Terry, Munir, and Eddie as well, and even to everyone. We're looking and the focus, and even that this 3 parts webinar focusing on vaccines and the logistics and distribution. But in terms of the overall vaccination program, vaccine all alone doesn't help. You have a number of medical supply, a number of other different type of supply that needs to be transported, and it's where you have the potential different mode of transport that are being used in order for such supply to reach the destination. But how likely do you see such very efficient logistic processes that have been implemented for vaccines that will potentially continue for other type of medical life science supplies? Who would you like to start? Mudir, maybe, or have you identified that as a concern as well going currently?
Yes, I think I mean, obviously the efforts, I mean, maybe Jennifer made a reference to that when she was actually talking about the different product codes that the airlines have created, and also discussed that also with multiple airlines in the very beginning, is that we obviously see the benefit of that, specifically for COVID-19 vaccine. That's as a top priority. I think the downside is maybe the other supplies, which are as critical in some of the cases as the vaccines. Talking here, for example, about syringes. And again, here we are facing a dilemma of the space and capacity versus the priority in comparison with vaccines, where we have experienced, for example, in several scenarios that syringes might not be following the same patterns for schedule reliability as for COVID-19 vaccines, and therefore, in several cases, arrive after the arrival of the vaccines, which is also not optimal for the speed of administration. So that is indeed something that would need to be thought of. I think maybe another area which is not necessarily directly linked to the airline industry is all the challenges that the shipping line industry is facing with the shortage of equipment from the Far East, considering some of the bulky items that are critical to vaccination, such as the cold chain equipment and PPEs, etc., and how the airline industry can represent a backup option for such bottlenecks in the global supply chain for the health supplies. And then the third layer comes with the fact that, I mean, obviously we are giving priority to the vaccine-related supplies, but indeed we are at the same time faced with dilemmas that we're also more, again, and equally critical supplies, such as nutrition supplies, you know, like going to Africa, for example, you know, like and other life-saving supplies for countries which are in high level emergencies, and how that prioritization also should be taken into account so that we don't try to resolve an issue and omit other global priorities as well. So this is just like the way as it's seen from our side. We're advocating for, let's say, obviously like an equal level of prioritization that is driven by programmatic needs whenever it's possible, of course, because capacity will remain limited, but that's why industry, with the assets that are being sort of available in the market and maybe grounded or not fully utilized, can be actually deployed for such purposes.
Thank you, Munir. Terry, maybe on the logistics side, you would like to add something?
Yeah, we've had to, and this goes back to us being agile and having open and honest discussions with our air carrier partners, because we've had to do consolidations. As Munir said, you can't have vaccines without syringes, and you can't have syringes without people with the appropriate PPE in certain markets. So we've actually had to work with the front end of the supply chain to consolidate book charters or book part charters into certain areas and make it a reasonable cost. And that's been, I think, the biggest challenge. But a lot of that also has to do with the instability in ocean freight right now. And we know what's going on with the capacity in ocean freight. So I think it has to be working openly, honestly, with air carrier partners, making sure that the price for a vaccine is not the same as a syringe. And I know that, you know, it's the balance here, because every company here, except for really UNICEF, is a for-profit company. And we have to be very careful about, you know, working for profit, but also making sure we're right-sizing the priority of syringes, right-sizing the priority for PPE, and also making sure it's not a cost that's unfeasible. So I think there's the challenge that we will have to work with moving forward and continuing to collaborate, just to make sure that we're right-sizing the solution and also right-sizing the cost parameters around that.
Thank you, Terry. Eddie, on that specific topic, do you have a comment?
I think it's a bit similar to us. We now have a, I will call it a vaccine, a COVID-19 vaccine division, if I may call ourselves like that, with a set of very high priorities. But next to that, we still have our traditional supply chain, which also has to maintain the supply levels. So so far we have not come across any shipment that we just said, okay, we are going to load the vaccine, we are going to offload something else. So that has not happened, but indeed both need to move. And if you really look at it, in the end, we all serve patients. So even in the conventional supply chain, we have to make sure we get that product to the patient in the right condition. So yeah.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Eddie. Yes, Jennifer?
I was going to say, if I could add one thing, I think one thing is we started looking at the task force and just at our specialty products across the board. We knew that there were still a lot of other medications that needed to get out there. So we wanted to make sure we prioritize those. And that goes back to talking with industry, talking to Pfizer, talking to Terry, and understanding what else is coming along with these COVID vaccines. We've also looked at we have our CBD, we have our CB2. We all have special handling codes, so we kind of used our previous experience to create those. And also, when you come to the booking piece of it, you have a CBD, you have a CB2 shipment together. Let's put them on the same area bill and let's move them together so we know when they get to destination, they're there together and they can be used together.
Thank you, Jennifer, and that reading my mind, because I had a question to in that sense as well to you and Jay-Z, where I mean, we've seen a number of established task forces, community working group to specifically looking on the vaccines, and its success being visible. What's the likelihood of having such readiness task force that would be continuing and initiated on other specifics other than just the vaccines? Do you see that continuing? And I think you just mentioned and you were just responding it with the work and the collaboration aspect. But I guess on the airport community, it's something that will be ongoing as well, not specifically on vaccine, I guess, Jay-Z.
I mentioned earlier, I think in my personal opinion, right, I don't think there is any turning back when it comes to community collaboration. I think going forward is going to be important. I think maybe just touching upon what Terry has mentioned at the start of the panel, right, is on data visibility. I think that there is an opportunity, or in fact, it is imperative for air cargo communities to come together to talk about how do we collectively enhance shipment visibility. I think that an effective cold chain can only happen if there is full shipment visibility. And different parties have to come together to see how they can connect both the digital as well as the physical world. I think today, data is still residing in silos. While we have started to see, stakeholders sharing data, but I think an effective cold chain solution is where everybody starts sharing data, of course, in a trusted manner to enhance visibility, so that preventive actions can be taken place in advance.
Thank you, GZ. I mean, you're making my work very easy, because I was looking at digitalization as a next topic. So it leads really well into that area, and we've seen that times of crisis are actually often accelerating the digital space. And on the IATA side, we've definitely are putting a lot of efforts on visibility and transparency, with especially all the companies that are going through a quality-driven program like the CIB Pharma, and those certified companies are being visible in the OneSource platform. Understanding who's capable of doing what and where, and how that information is shared is critical. And maybe a question on digitalization to the different panelists on how have you seen that data sharing and increased initiative going forward, if there are any experience you would like to share. And I think that's on data sharing, on maybe on logistics, on operations, and so on. But there's another aspect, maybe specifically to Eddie, to the extent of possibility to share. Digitalization is as well there to understand how, when a vaccine is being developed and manufactured, you have to adapt yourself as well on the new figures, new information you receive as a manufacturer, to potentially reduce the storage temperature for logistics and transport. So it's an ongoing day-to-day knowledge, information and sharing. So maybe before I'll give the floor to Eddie on the logistic transport side, how do you see digitalization having a greater impact in the coming months and years?
From my perspective, tremendous. I mean, so I think we have to continue to work towards digitalization, visibility, data sharing, API feeds. So it's something our company is wholly embracing, and we're well on that journey.
Any other sharing initiatives from the other before I give the floor to Eddie?
I think one of the other things we learned is the sharing of information, being able to send something as simple as a notification to a customer when their shipment has arrived, when it's departed, that sort of thing. So just looking at where we can go to move forward with messaging and all of that.
Manu, you wanted to add something?
Well, basically echoing what has been said, I think once again, we noticed that maybe the air cargo industry on the airline side of business is not a front runner when it comes to technology and digitization. And so once again, we are confronted with this. And I think the urgency is there, the need is there. So I think that all of us together are making plans as we speak.
I fully agree with you, Manu, and within IATA as well, we're moving forward, and especially on the digital cargo team on the One Record initiative, to really streamline the processes with the open architecture. So Eddie, something you would like to add? I put you a bit on the spot on, okay. As the information comes comes in, how is this managed? And I guess digital solutions are already in place, especially when it comes to security of such very high value products. But what are your insights on that?
So I've been an advocate of this for quite some time, struggled with it for a longer time. And I must say that by now, having introduced real-time loggers into the vaccine shipments, we actually see the benefit. Yeah? Because now the difference is we're actually in control. We know where the shipment is. We know what the temperature is. Yeah, we have finally managed to set up real working control towers 24/7, both externally and internally. And this is basically a great benefit, because now for the first time we have an opportunity, and I'm not saying it's fully deployed yet, far from, but we have an opportunity to interact on the transport if the product tells us that it is needed. And without going into details, we've had a few occasions where we were very blessed by having real-time monitors and having those control towers. What is still missing now, I would say, is the link. How can we get the air freight, the cargo imp messages in that system? And now I'm not going to name the name because that's not fair. And we're at the same time looking how can we integrate the real-time data that we already have for all of our road shipments, because they're all GPRS controlled anyway. So those two elements we still need to sort of make our centralized database even stronger than what it is today. But unfortunately, and I've stated it already a few times, it has taken this pandemic to get this done. Yeah.
Yeah, and can I add to that, Andrea? So I think basically the use of loggers, for example, for tracing the shipments, is also covering some of the gaps on tracking basically the shipments that is existing at the moment in the airline industry. But I think if I want to kind of take digitalization and maybe emphasize some of the priorities, at least from the receiving end, or also from the shippers side, I would probably summarize them in three elements. The first one is visibility on airlines services, availability and active flights, etc., is non-available in any platform anywhere according to our knowledge, except from having to check with every specific carrier the different services that they have, etc., on an ad hoc basis. That's the first one where I believe like a minimum of, let's say, collaboration in the industry to make sure that there is such a level of visibility to the wider, let's say, shippers, not only freight forwarders, is key, at least for awareness of the options for planning purposes. So that's the first one. And then the second one is related to maybe some of the services. We talked about the product codes, etc., but one of the key services that we've experienced is bookings and timely bookings and confirmations. And just to illustrate that is with all the control towers that have been established during the Easter holidays or weekends, we continue to face delays in having booking confirmations, for example, where in other, I mean, some airlines that are leading the area, like their options for online bookings, but that's not generalized over the board, and particularly not for cold chain due to some of the additional checks that are required and can potentially be streamlined. And then the third one is what maybe Eddie was referring to in terms of the actual visibility. So now there are several workarounds about using loggers, etc., because again, you need to be able to track like a given flight, go onto a specific airline site or track and trace, and there is no kind of like platform globally as part of the collaboration in the industry that gives that visibility in real time. So these are the main 3 points I would potentially consider for digitalization efforts across the industry.
Thank you, Moni. Any comments to that from the other panelists? No? Okay. I think I mean we've covered a number of different areas, and there's been an interesting question from the audience, and that leads to potentially taking out your foresight for the future, which on the different panelists, on your opinion, when do you think that all this pandemic global problem could be ended and has a pretty normal operation around the world be starting all over again? So I think it's where you have to take out your crystal ball and tell us right now how you feel about that. But on that sense, I'd like maybe to understand as a final remark from the different panelists is, are there any specific expectations that you would see happening, continuing, ending, that would allow operation to start or continue on the rise of having those operations back up? So I'll start with whoever wants to start. Otherwise, I designate a volunteer.
Yeah,
I'll
Andrea,
start, Andrew. Go ahead,
go ahead.
I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, herd immunity is going to be key here. Getting the vaccines in everybody's arms, getting us back up and running. I wish we all had the crystal ball over the last 14, 15 months, because we'd know how to handle this a little bit better. But I don't think we'll ever get back to normal, but I do think we'll get back to the new normal.
Manu,
Yeah,
you wanted to add something? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to add, let's say this pandemic and all the vaccine movements, I mean, we're just at the beginning. So this will take a lot more time, but it's going to become, I think, business as usual one day. So our industry, it needs to be prepared as from next year or within 2 years maybe to send like the COVID vaccines around in the campaigns around the world, as we do with normal flu campaigns. And as Jennifer said, there's gonna be a return to new, and what the new is gonna look like, we don't know. It's gonna be a little bit different.
Good. JZ?
Of course, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was saying that I agree with Jennifer that I think herd immunity is critical. And as we know, that will depend on the 3 A's of the vaccine. Number one is vaccines availability, and that we really look to Eddie from Pfizer. And second, of course, is vaccines accessibility and fair receipt of the vaccine, and that we look to Monier from UNICEF. And last but not least, vaccines adoptions. And it really depends on us, to advocate, our friends and families to take on vaccination, and also working together with the various community to encourage inoculation.
Yeah, very well said. I should have let you almost the final remark of this webinar, which I think is a very good point. Terry?
So I can't say much more than what everybody else said, but I think we also have to keep a close eye on the different variants, because the more that we don't have herd immunity, the more opportunity we have to have a new variant to come in. And until the variant burns itself out or becomes mutated to the point where it's not as detrimental, I think we are going to have a very new normal. So it's going to be vaccination, recurrent vaccinations. I think masks in the airports, masks where we have crowded spaces. So I'm prepared for the new normal. I'm okay with it, but I'm certainly not going to shine my crystal ball to put a date on this. No way.
Thanks, Terry. Munir?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the key learning is that we're all going through this unique phase of humanity where we have this global pandemic, and insist on the global side of it and how it links to what we advocate for, that no one is safe until everyone is safe. And that basically leads us to continue to think, first of all, how we continue to ensure the equity and fairness in the distribution on the one hand, and on the other hand, considering the scale And again, we're kind of really keen on making sure that the clear message is raised to everyone that this is not the task that is actually within the scope of one entity or one party. It's requiring a true multilateral effort at a global level where everybody needs to know their roles and responsibilities clearly for the sake of a global coordination efforts to make sure that we achieve the expected results and get the vaccines to the final beneficiaries.
Thank you, Monir. And last but not least, as I said, all eyes on you, Eddie.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, okay. Most has been said, obviously. I mean, normal is not coming back. The new normal, whatever that may mean, will drive our lives forward. Yeah, from what we hear, in somewhere between 5 and 7 years, this will turn into a flu. Yeah. So, hey guys, if you want to look at the future, it's probably 5 to 7 years, and maybe by then, somebody has cooked up a new one. I don't know. But okay, yeah. For now, we fully concentrate on maintaining and beefing up production as much as we can, and by this trying to serve the world. But that's as much as we can do. And if you ask me for the crystal ball, I can tell you it ain't working, because I still haven't won with the lottery. So the damn thing ain't working. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all of you, really, to take the time to share your experience with the audience today. And we're reaching towards the end of the session, but I just want to take a few minutes to conclude. First of all, thank you again to all the speakers and panelists today that really provided some element on how we can pave the path for the future. So thank you again to everyone. And maybe just on closing remarks, I mean, there's been a number of lessons learned that have been shared today from our distinguished speakers and panelists. There are, whether these are on capacity, regulatory infrastructure, partnership, communication, collaboration, sustainability, quality and security. I will not go into the details, just to let you know that all of those lessons learned as well being developed and are shared in the 4th edition of the IATA Guidance for Vaccines and Pharmaceutical Logistics and Distribution document, which aims really at providing accurate and rapid information to the industry. And what we've discussed today really shows the active, efficient, and effective aspect of communication and collaboration along the supply chain stakeholders. In terms of visibility, as I mentioned earlier, the OneSource platform providing capabilities and infrastructure, visibility, transparency are as well keywords. Data sharing is something that must continue as digitalization is evolving. So the call to action remains and is reinforced, keeping engaged with a number of authorities, international, global organizations, and the supply chain stakeholders to collaborate, coordinate, and communicate. We will continue as IATA as well to assist the airline industry, whether it's by guidance material, regulations, training, which is paramount for successful implementation, CIV, or any quality-driven programs, and as well visibility. But what is critical now is putting the lessons learned to good use and ensure continuous improvement, being flexible, agile, and responsive, understanding what is at stake, and also showing the importance of the air freight industry in the global economy. The experience of in international partnership has been and will continue to be highly valued. So we've seen that the awareness campaign for the logistic industry to be ready and prepared for the large scale of vaccine transport and distribution has proven to be very constructive and efficient, as the industry supply chain stakeholders have proactively taken the lead to organize themselves in identifying the needs. But as it has been mentioned several times today, the global effort is not over because it's an ongoing process that not only addresses the needs for vaccination, the vaccines as such, but has been that success has been achieved and should benefit as well in the long run, especially for health, medical, life science, and humanitarian supplies in the same way it has benefited the process on the vaccine. So finally, please visit as well the IATA website that provides additional information and related resources. This webinar has been is being recorded, will be made available together with the presentation on the IATA website shortly. So I would like to take again this opportunity to thank the speakers for their time, for sharing information. As well thanking everyone that has participated to this webinar, providing your questions and sharing your views, and for joining this session. I would like as well to give a special thank you to my colleague Maria Jitomirski, who has been assisting me as well in building this series of the 3 webinars. So thank you very much, Maria. This has been excellent work. And I would like to wish you good work in keeping cargo flying with essential supplies, such as the vaccines, and especially that all these reach all of us. Vaccination campaigns, herd immunity, I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and we're looking forward to get out of that tunnel. So with that, I wish you a very nice day or evening, and stay safe, and hope to speak to you soon. Goodbye. Thank you.